Before I get into today's video, we have a very exciting announcement. As of today, we have released an official Spacedock reference book, Designing the Perfect Space Fighter, inspired by classic visual dictionaries and cross-section books. It's focused on the process of creation of not one, but two brand new original space fighter designs, putting into practice the lessons from popular Spacedock videos on the topic, and brought to life by 3D artist Holly Jenker with additional illustrations by Ethan Leroyth. You can get a copy of your very own by pledging at the Gravimetric Space Gentleman tier on our Patreon, which is linked in the description and pinned comment below. It has been a real labour of love putting this together for you, and if this one is well received, we hope to do similar reference books on other topics in the future. Please do check it out if you choose to pledge, and thank you so much for the support. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana, and today I want to talk about my top 5 fighters that aren't the Gunstar, because I've talked about that one plenty of times already. We're going right into it with number 5, what I've always known simply as the Droid Starfighter because it has a stupid real full name. Though Vulture Droid is fine, I guess. Unlike many teeny tiny fighters in Star Wars, this thing almost has an excuse for being as small and thin as it is, since there's no need to keep a person alive in it. Even then, each individual element is basically just a thin blade, but this does at least match the equally skinny battle droids that this was introduced alongside. But where do all the mechanisms for its transforming walking mode fit? It's going to be walking around with tiny little spindles for joints and it's going to break, but it doesn't matter because of the rule of cool. That shape and its sharpness is what makes it stand out and be unique amongst all the various ship stars in Star Wars. The prequels have their problems, but you cannot fault them for coming up with an actual new and interesting visual language for the antagonist faction. That said, I think the Vultures looked a lot better in Trade Federation brown than the messy grey and blue CIS colours that they sport in Episode 3. In 4th place isn't really one fighter, but more like a classification or style of them from R-Type Final, which I played a lot. I did everything in that game except for beating stage F-C, one of the final levels that you only ever got one try at. It was a fun game, with neat enemies and a super cool level progression system that depended on how you fought certain bosses on your playthroughs, and if you used certain ships on that run. And the ships were where the game really shined, having 101 different vessels to unlock in different ways, each with their own weapons and equipment and little bits of lore. They all added a fantastic amount of variety to a game designed around replaying it over and over, and my favourite of them was always the R-13s, the Cerberus, Hades and Charon, because of the combination of anchor force and lightning wave cannon they had. Both of these weapons looked cool and were superb for doing fire and forget damage that let you concentrate on not dying. And the Cerberus was even a corrupted boss on a secret level, which makes it extra cool. Some of the other ships I loved from that game are the R9D series for their big beam weapons, and the first two R9Es because of their disc radomes. I love any setting that includes support craft like these that are absolutely crucial in the real world, and they looked great too. The number 3 spot goes to another 90s design, the Bubble Fighters from the introductory sequence of Lost in Space. Certainly a lot of B-Wing inspiration here with the centrally mounted fishbowl cockpit module that rotates independently of the big long wings it has for some reason. All the key systems are joined to this module. The engine is on the back and the gun turret thing sticks out on the bottom beside the bubble. A big benefit of this rotating cockpit style is that it reduces or at least redirects felt G-forces on the pilot. But the movie doesn't feel like showing something cool like this in favour of the fighters just rolling and rolling and rolling for no apparent reason. Another issue is the otherwise excellent visibility that the fishbowl allows is somewhat marred by all the floaty projected HUD elements everywhere. Like, come on, these are just going to be more distracting than actually helpful in a combat situation, but sci-fi gonna sci-fi. Despite those problems, I still love the bubble ship just because I think it looks neat, and I like this escape pod staging thing it can do. And a quarter of a century ago when this movie came out, I thought all that incessant spinning and the paint jobs they had was super cool and badass. In second place are the various designs of the original Cylon Raider, from both the 70s Battlestar Galactica and the Ronald D. Moore reimagining. Everyone loves the Vipers, especially in the remake, but for me there's just something about the old Raiders. They're one of those rare multi-crew space fighters, but unlike, say, an ARC 170, the extra crew aren't just there to point another gun at something. Instead, they operate more like a teeny tiny ship in their own right, with a command centurion giving orders to the other two. That said, this probably wouldn't work all that great, because really, how much can these craft have going on that they need 3 crew members? Beyond that, they look neat to me. That oval flying wing shape is reminiscent of old school flying saucers, but with some familiar design elements on the central section, like those chunky intakey sort of things on the underside, and who doesn't love that slatted canopy right in the middle? So the old version is great, but the reimagined version is way better. It does some basic tweaks like switching out the weapons and adding maneuvering thrusters to match the more grounded style of the remake, but it also got sleeker and more refined. It's less chunky while keeping all the same design elements, as well as adjusting things a bit, like the wingtips being elongated forward to really link them to the modern Raider shape. BSG Deadlock goes a step further with this train of thought to show Raider design iteration, as it also includes a prototype Raider that is almost identical to the original, and war drivers, which are little hacker ships that fill in another sort of missing link step between old and modern Raiders. Before the big reveal of the number 1 spot though, I have a couple of honourable mentions here that didn't quite make the cut. The first is Warframe's Railjack, because it's not really a fighter. It's a pretty large multi-crew ship with a big interior to run around in and lots of utilities, so it's a fully fledged ship in its own right. But when you take the pilot seat, it very much plays like a fighter does, zooming around in constant motion, taking out enemies left and right, unless you've got a fully spec'd out one and you can just missile spam everything to death. It's great fun, and I miss that one mission node with no side objectives. The other honourable mention is the Star Fury from Babylon 5, which, while being really well thought out with its engine layout and somewhat realistic flight model, I just have no emotional connection to this design. I recognise that it's really well made and all, but it just doesn't hit for me. My number 1 favourite space fighter is of course the Gunstar, but as I have been banned from talking about that one, the top spot goes to the wonderful F-302 from Stargate. This is another multi-crew fighter, though this time it only has a pilot and an optional weapons officer, though really we all know it's because having 2 people on board lets them talk to each other easily. It also sets up neat little events like rescue missions and such. Visually, it is very much a towery version of the classic gold Death Glider. This is despite it being fully made on Earth without any alien components, but it keeps the same design cues such as the big downswept wings, which forced the landing gear to be comically long. Overall, it is pretty well sized too, though the main core of the craft with its 3 different engine systems feels a bit too small to house them all, as well as the landing gear. Adding in the hyperdrive from the X-302 just makes things even worse in this regard, but at least it's not as bad as many other fighters in Sci-Fi, and 302s do look well proportioned. They're also super neat as they fly around shooting rock-on missiles at Death Gliders and whatnot, which fully reiterates the distinct differences between the gold, stagnant way of thinking about combat and the more to-the-point and effective methods of the Towery. Later on, after Atlantis had started, they all got updated with railguns to make them more dogfighty, which, well, I've had opinions on before about this being a bit of a dull step back, but it did increase their potency. And once again, hammers home the unique thing that Stargate as a franchise did with that endless marching forward of technology that humanity was experiencing. In a similar note, they also had all sorts of cool extra features like a little cargo/bomb bay and the grappling hooks. Best of all though, they were a key part of Cam Mitchell's backstory. Just an excellent way to introduce that brilliant character for the Ori arc of SG-1 and to show the effects that the greater events of the show had on people outside of the SGC. I'd love to hear about which is your favourite space fighter in the comments below and why you love it so much. Please do also like and subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you for watching. If you enjoy these videos and want to support their creation, you can give us super thanks, become a YouTube channel member, or join our Patreon, where you can now get our space fighter design reference book, as well as having your name featured at the end of videos. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.